Well, it is noon on the dot, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today for delivering individualized and spiralized practice for long-term math retention. We're so excited to partner with Get More Math on this presentation and Erica Martin, who is the Director of Training for Get More Math. Erica Martin is our excellent expert today. She is the Director of Training for Get More Math. Erica resides in Tyrone, Pennsylvania, where she has taught middle and high school math for the past 14 years. After the first year of using Get More Math, her high school jumped to 7th in the state for Algebra 1 Keystone Growth. As a full-time Get More Math trainer and program development specialist, her goal is to share with other teachers the potential for tremendous student growth by using Get More Math in their classrooms.
Okay, fantastic. So let's go ahead and take a look at our agenda for today. We're going to start out with my story. Now, what's funny is I assure you that my story is going to resonate. It's going to be very similar to your story. I've now trained teachers all across the United States, and I will tell you, math teachers have very common frustrations, very common struggles. So we're going to talk about those struggles and how introducing mixed review on a regular basis, nearly every day, for me was a game changer. In addition to that mixed review piece, we're going to also talk about how I made a shift in the way I tested my students. I moved from simply providing chapter tests into cumulative tests, and how that actually prepared my students so much better for that end of year assessment, in addition to decreasing their test anxiety. So we're going to talk about those two pieces. I'm going to give you a classroom demonstration of what it actually looked like for my students from start to finish. And then we're going to take a deeper dive into what the student experience actually looks like. When the students were when they were using Get More Math in my classroom, what did the practice look like? How was it different than the practice I was providing before I started using Get More Math? Then we're going to take a look at exams within Get More Math and how we can use those to provide cumulative tests to better prepare our students for that end of year assessment. And then we'll wrap up with some information on the free trial that we do offer, as well as various different training opportunities. So that's the plan for today. So let's go ahead and get started with my story. Now, I'm wondering if most of you would relate to this is probably the most typical day you'd see in a math classroom. Most teachers are going to take a good portion of their day to teach some sort of lesson. And then we're going to do some guided practice together, but we're ultimately going to follow that up with independent practice for our students to practice the material that we just taught. That's how we were taught as students, and more than likely that's what we're doing for our students now. And then we take that day and we follow it up with similar days, and we chunk it into some sort of cohesive concept in what we call a unit or a chapter. And what do we all do at the end of every unit or at the end of every chapter? Well, we have to give a test. And I don't know a single math teacher out there that doesn't do the same thing every day before a test. What do we all do? Well, we have to review. And why do we have to review before a test when we're simply testing in a unit? Well, because quite frankly, sometimes our students have already forgot, or it's already blurry, what we taught in the beginning of a unit. So we've got to take that day to review it, to refresh it, so that they can pass that test. And this is pretty much, in my experience and the experience of all the teachers I've worked with, a typical math unit. We grade the test. What do we do after the test? We probably realized that there were a handful of skills that maybe a lot of our students, or the majority of our students, seem to miss. So we might take some portion of the next day and we're going to go over those mistakes. We're going to try to learn from them so that we don't make those mistakes again. And then we take this unit and we repeat it over and over and over again throughout the year. Now, let's have a reality check. Is this actually working? If our students are forgetting material in the beginning of a unit by the end of a unit, what are the chances they're going to remember material from the beginning of a year at the very end of a year? Well, I can tell you, if you've been teaching in math long enough, you know that it doesn't happen. Because in reality, when we're reviewing for that test, we're really cramming. How many of you have ever taken your actual test, changed some of the numbers, erased or put white out on the word exam and typed the word review, and then passed it out as a review the day before the test? I know I have. We're cramming for these tests. And then when you give the test back to the students, there's like this flush. How many of you have ever seen your students? It's almost like there's a sigh of relief, specifically with those 8th graders. It'd be like, oh, I hated chapter 3. Thank goodness it's over. I don't have to see it again now because we're moving on to chapter 4. Well, here's what happens. You put that together in a year, and by the time you get to the 3rd unit, what's happening to unit 1 and 2? It's fuzzy, it's gray. Those students aren't thinking about that material. Fast forward to the middle of the year. Now you're halfway through all of your content. Well, what's happening to those first 3 units? It's not just fuzzy anymore, it's gone. How many of you have got to the end of the year? It's time to review before the big test, and you bring up a concept from unit 1 or unit 2. And not only is it like they forget it, but the students look at you like, you never taught me that. I don't remember that. That happened to me all the time. And so I was like, oh my goodness, I'm not at a place where I can simply review. I'm at a place where I feel like I have to reteach almost an entire year of concepts in a few short weeks before this test. It just felt like it was so unproductive. Now, I will tell you, this wasn't just my experience, and it's not just your experience. It was the experience of Josh Britton. He was a teacher in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. He taught for 20 years. And after his first year, what he realized was, well, wait a second. I'm teaching a lesson. I'm providing practice, and my students are learning the math. I see it. I see them doing it. And then why at the end of the year are they failing a final? I don't understand. If this typical day is working, why doesn't it work in the course of a year? And he realized that he needed to improve this. And what needed to be improved was he had to introduce this concept of spiralized, individualized mixed review on a regular basis. He knew that it wasn't good enough to just teach the lesson and practice the lesson. If he wasn't consistently reaching back into mixed review, his students were not retaining the material. So he suddenly started to really think about this idea of mixed review. How could he provide mixed review that would truly support long-term retention? We're talking the course of a year. He realized it had to be cumulative. It had to constantly be pulling back to all of the skills he would teach throughout the year. He also realized that in order for it to be truly effective, it needed to be individualized. We all know every kid has different strengths and weaknesses. So when you're looking at a cumulative review in December, the skills that Johnny needs to work on most are most certainly going to be different than the skills Sarah needs to work on most. So he's sitting there thinking, okay, so I need to not only develop the lesson, teach the lesson, provide the practice, but I now need to somehow provide a mixed review that is cumulative and individualized for every one of my students. Well, that's not possible. Why don't we all do that? Well, we all don't do that because it is truly not possible. We humans cannot do that. But guess what? This is one of the places that a computer works really well. So he built himself an app over the course of 20 years in the classroom that would do exactly what I just described. It would provide that mixed review. And it also provides that focused practice, the practice on the material he just taught in the lesson. But let me explain what it doesn't provide. It doesn't provide the lesson because while he realized that a math program can do these things better than he could, he never felt that it could provide the instruction better than he could. And we strongly feel that way. You, the teacher, will always be the best person to really drive home the instruction, make those connections. And so the lesson, we don't have any instructional component. It's really just providing the practice. So keep that in mind. Now, if we take that concept, that improved unit, and we put it together, imagine if every time your students were in that green mode, they were getting spiraled, individualized review. Guess what doesn't need to happen the day before a test? We don't need to have a day to quote review or cram or hand them a carbon copy of the test. Because when they are seeing the skills over and over and over on a daily basis, they're already prepared for the test. And so this is where I'm going to shift into this concept of not only did I change the way I provided practice when I used this in my classroom, but I also changed the way I gave exams. Here's what I did. When it was test day in this particular unit, I told my students I was not going to include any new material from the previous 4 days. It was too new. They didn't have time to continue to practice. They didn't have time to make it stick. But anything prior to that week was fair game on the test. And what happened was my test would simply grow incrementally throughout the year in the same fashion. So take a look. Here's that first test. Remember, not including that information, just a little too new. I'm going to include the information before. Then we're going to move forward, constantly reviewing. Remember, every time the students are in that green mixed review, it's not just the review from that week or that day, it's for the entire year. So we get to the second unit. I'm not including that information. I'm most certainly going to include these new skills. They have yet to be assessed. And then take a sprinkling of that first week, and I'm going to make sure that I include it. That's not a big jump for my students. They just took a test on some of that material, so it's just a small jump. Now look at Unit 3. Not going to include this. I'm definitely going to include the new material that has yet to be assessed. And then my students know anything from the beginning is fair game, so I take a sprinkling of those first 3 weeks and I include it. And I do it again. And I do it again. And suddenly, when I started testing my students in this fashion, what happened when we got to the big test at the end of the year? Guess whose students weren't panicking? They weren't freaking out because the big test wasn't a big test. It was just the last test of the year. It was the next test they were going to have. They had been practicing this material all year long on an almost daily basis. And I'm telling you, it transformed my classroom. Now, if you're looking at this thinking like, wait a second, I can't do all this. We understand you can't do all this. Get More Math provides the focus practice on the new material, the mixed review practice that's individualized per student, and it also can provide those cumulative tests for your students. What you still focus on is delivering the instruction. Okay, so that's my story. I'm wondering, typically when I deliver this live, I look around and I see lots of bobbleheads in the room because they're all shaking their heads saying, yeah, Erica, I can relate. Can you relate to, I think most teachers would love to provide mixed review on a regular basis. It's just very hard for us to provide that. And then we talked about that cumulative testing. So let's go ahead and take a look at the class pattern. Now I will tell you, when I was a teacher, we were required to have what was called a bell ringer. And so some sort of warm up, some activity for our students to start with as soon as they got into my classroom. Well, my thought was this: there is nothing more valuable than my students spending 5 minutes in mixed review where I know they're spiraling back through all the skills and it's also being prioritized for each kiddo based on their needs. So that's where my students started. This gave me some time to take attendance and do all those sort of organizational things that every teacher needs to do in the beginning of a class. Once that piece was done, everybody closed their Chromebooks down and we moved over to the lesson. This is where, again, my creativity comes into place. I'm going to either have group activities or maybe direct instruction. This is where you're still in charge providing that lesson. Then we would move into some sort of guided practice. We would do some practice together. And this is where I was really starting to look at my class and I was starting to collect evidence to figure out which students were ready for the independent practice piece. That's that purple piece of the chart. When they were ready to go work and Get More Math on the focus practice that I was going to provide based on just the new lesson that I taught. And inevitably, certain kids were ready earlier than others. And so when that was the case, I go ahead and let those kids over. I would say, go ahead and start. Get started and Get More Math. If you're struggling, you can always come back to the rest of us. I would stay with the rest of the class. Maybe we would do 1 or 2 more examples together. Over time, more students would show they were ready for that independent practice. And eventually we would be at a place right here. If you can take a look at this pie chart, this is what I loved the most. How many of you have ever taught a class where you just had a handful of kids that were needier than everybody else? They needed a couple extra examples. They needed more attention from you. Here I am getting to work with those 4 kiddos while the majority of my class is working in that focus practice. And you even notice that a handful of those high flyers, those advanced kiddos that work faster than everybody else, they have already moved into mixed review. And meanwhile, I've done nothing. I'm still working with the kiddos back in the guided practice. And I'll show you how that works in the app. So this was the best piece for me, that all of my students at various levels were getting completely different levels of practice, and I wasn't having to manage any of it. Now, what happens over time? Eventually, we want those other kiddos to move over into the focused practice, and then everybody, when they are ready, moves in to mixed review. So let's see what that looks like. Let's move from the class pattern and take a look at one particular student. So let's assume we've already done the review. They've already received the lesson. We've done the guided practice. We're going to take one kiddo. We're going to call him Freddie Johnson, and we're going to move him into his focus practice, which we call a practice set. Now, let's take a look at this screen for a second. Freddie's logged in. If you can guess, what do you think my lesson was on today? That's right. We were talking about slope. So you can see in the top, I've got a title of slope, and it says 0 of 9. 9 is an important number here. I set that as the teacher. 9 is my practice set goal. 9 is the number that when a student reaches 9 points, Get More Math will transition them from the focus practice into the mixed review. So it's not our end goal. It doesn't mean we're done. It's more like a gateway. It's a transition. We're moving from the practice set into the mixed review. Take a look at those 3 colored squares, okay? Each square is a different skill. It's a different problem type that I've chosen for my students to practice. The one that is outlined in blue is the one that's currently selected. So Freddie's going to log in. He's going to see this question. He's going to go ahead and answer it, and he gets it right. Smileys fall down from the screen, and you'll notice that he's earned 1 point for today. Do you see that Get More Math has now moved the blue outline over to the right square, and it's taken the $ off of that middle box? I'm not going to address why just yet. Let's see if you guys can figure that out. Okay, so I'm now working on finding the slope, but you'll notice that this time the question is asked given 2 ordered pairs. Now, if you are an algebra teacher, I bet you know that most of your students, when they take y2 minus y1, if there's a negative in there, there's a chance they're going to make a mistake. And so Freddie's going to make a mistake. He's going to do 2 as his answer, and that's wrong. Now, this was one of the massive changes for me in my classroom. Here's Freddie. He got a problem wrong. He is not going to get a fresh problem to try until he fixes the problem, until he identifies his error and puts the correct answer in. Well, that for my students was huge. Here's what Freddie would have done in the past. If I was giving him practice on a worksheet or even out of his textbook or even some other programs online, he would get it wrong. He'd move on to the next one. He just wanted to go to the next problem. He wasn't actually concerned with figuring out the mistake he was making. He just wanted to get done. Well, what Freddie realizes here is he has to figure out his mistake in order to get the next problem. So I was able to engage with Freddie and say, well, Freddie, let's take a look at what happened here. Oh, do you see that when you subtracted the -3, you forgot to change that to a positive? So if you think about it, that seems like such a small detail, but it's actually huge because now I've identified this mistake so that hopefully when Freddie gets the next question, he won't do it again. But in my old practice, Freddie made that mistake, went to the next problem, made the mistake again, went to the next problem, made the mistake again. And what I found was the homework or the practice that I was giving my students, more often than not, was reinforcing mistakes. It was reinforcing errors because my students just did error, 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 error. Where in Get More Math, I was like, whoa, they have to suddenly identify and fix every mistake, which, believe it or not, then they're more likely to make it the next time. So I'm going to show you what happens after I go and I sit down, I talk to Freddie, we work this out, he realizes the mistake he makes, he fixes it, smileys fall. But take a look at his points for today. Freddie says, Mrs. Martin, I don't understand. I still only have 1 point. And that's when I get to explain to Freddie, that's right. The only time you earn a point in Get More Math is if you get it right on the first try. If you get it wrong, we're going to ask you to fix it, but you're not going to earn a point. Boy, My students that wanted to rush, they didn't love that answer, but you know what they started to do? They started to slow down. They started to check their work. They were less sloppy. They would check their notes. They would take better notes because what they realized was by rushing through their work, we've got middle school teachers here. I know you're working with students that want to rush through their work. When they rush through their work because they simply want to get done, it doesn't work on Get More Math. Because the more you rush, the more mistakes you make, the more mistakes you need to fix, but you don't earn a point. And so that's why I say, Freddie, there's only a 9 there. I'm only asking you to do 9 of these, but I need you to slow down and get them right. I need you to show me you actually understand the math we went over today. That, folks, is just one of the many, many key features of Get More Math that made a fundamental difference in my classroom. So here we go. Freddie realizes this time it's a fraction. He's going to enter the answer. Oh, he gets it right. Therefore, he has his 2 points. You'll notice Get More Math has now chosen the first square. This time we're asking about slope in terms of a graph. We'll answer this one, and we got our 3rd point. So let's go ahead and fast forward 3 points later. Remember, here Freddie is in his practice set. Do you notice that now some folks have joined him? He's not the only one working. We're going to see what happens. Now he has 6 of 9. Let's go ahead and get his 7th point and his 8th point, and he's about to reach that practice set goal of 9. And when he does, he's not finished. Do you notice there was nothing on the screen that says you're done, which is often how we teach math. We teach you a skill, slope, you practice the new skill, slope, and then you're done. You're done for the day because you practiced the material I taught you. Well, folks, that's why our kids are constantly forgetting. This piece, in my opinion, is the most important piece of the day. If we aren't reaching mixed review, they're not going to see those older spiraled skills. So what just happened here, Freddie hit that 9 and he moved right into the mixed review. And all his peers get to do that as well. As soon as they reach 9, and they're all going to do it in their own time, everybody moves to the mixed review. Okay, let's look at the mixed review. There's a little bit more going on here. Suddenly we don't have 3 squares anymore. That was the focus practice. Now every square on your screen is a different skill that you, the teacher, have taught at some point throughout the year, okay? Now, there's lots of colors here. We see some red squares, yellow, there's green. We see some silver stars. One has a $sign on it, and some gold stars. Okay, those are all different color ratings that show the proficiency level that the student has earned on the given skill. So it's kind of like a nice little snapshot of how the student's doing on whichever skill it is that you have selected. You can see again the blue outline so you know which skill we're looking at right now. And then let's focus for a second on those $signs. I mentioned them earlier in the practice set, but they're actually most important in mixed review. And here's why. The $signs are how we individualize from one student to another. And it's how we prioritize the practice for Freddie himself. So we're looking at all these skills from the entire year, and we're saying, okay, what is our priority right now for Freddie? What is it that he should be working on most? And we're collecting all of his data, every question he's ever answered throughout the entire year. We're crunching all of those numbers to see which skills is he still weak on, which skills are getting too old. Maybe it's a skill he was quite good at, but if he hasn't seen it for a week and a half, do you think maybe we should give it back to him just to see if he still remembers it? I'll tell you what, it's a very intricate algorithm. I don't know the secret sauce, but I'll tell you, knowing that a math teacher created it and tweaked it over 20 years in a classroom, and the fact that I've seen it work in my own classroom is why I can trust it without knowing exactly how it works. So what I tell my students is, you have to follow the $signs. They're the only ones that are worth a point. I'm gonna say that again. The $signs are the only ones that are worth a point. And that's because you know the student. You do know the student in your class that will simply find the easiest skill on the board and he'll do 100 of them just so he gets 100 points. Well, Get More Math doesn't allow you to do that. You have to work the problems that we've decided you need most. So here's the question. If you're looking at Freddie's screen, and right now Freddie has a yellow square selected, but he can technically work any of these $signs. Which do you think Freddie will choose? Well, I can tell you, if the colors go from red to yellow to green to silver to gold, he's going to choose the silver $sign because that's the skill that he's the best at. He's going to answer that question and he's going to earn a point. And then Get More Math is going to take the $sign off that square and say, thank you, Freddie. Thanks for verifying that you still know how to do that skill, but it's no longer eligible for a point for now. You'll have to wait some time until we put a $sign back on there. But we will happily put the blue outline back on that yellow square. So Freddie says, okay, I'll go ahead and answer that one. $signs, he gets himself another point. But do you notice that we said, hey, that yellow square you just did, you're still not quite so hot on that one. So we'll keep that one as an eligible question. You can answer that one again if you want. And so it's really, really neat to watch how the $signs move and to be able to trust that a program is analyzing all of your students' data to decide which skills they should be working on so that you don't have to. Okay? So there we did. We took a nice deep look into the focus practice within the student app as well as the mixed review. So we've got one more chunk here, and then I promise I'll make sure we have time for questions. Let's take a look at exams. I know we already saw this slide, but I just want to review again this idea of if we were consistently building cumulative tests for our students, would we be better preparing them for that end of the year test, as opposed to just giving chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and then at the end of the year saying, oh, by the way, now you're going to have to know how to prepare for and be ready for a test that covers 12 chapters. That's not fair to our students, but how do we do it? Well, we also have an exams module within Get More Math. We can provide exams to our students, simply including the skills that we provide in practice. It's very easy, and I'll show you a little sneak peek of that here in a second. We also offer flexible grading, so it's not an all or nothing situation. You will have complete control to look at every student, every question. You'll see their answer and the correct answer, and you'll be able to decide whether they get full, partial, or no credit for those questions. We also have what's called a corrections mode. So not only can your students take the exams, but we can then require that they fix and correct all of their mistakes. After they correct those mistakes and practice those skills, Get More Math builds a follow-up exam for every student that is based solely on the skills they missed on the original exam. So what's really interesting is you make one exam up there in the blue circle. You have 30 students take the exam. You grade them. Your students correct their mistakes, practice those errors, and then Get More Math for you makes 30 individualized quizzes, totally different quizzes, so that you can then see, did my students actually grow? Did they actually learn from their mistakes? So remember how before we had that little chunk of the next day where we said, oh no, we're trying to learn from our mistakes. Get More Math is actually going to show you if your students did in fact learn from their mistakes. We offer 2 great analysis reports where we can compare those exams to our follow-up scores, as well as a really nice item analysis so that you can look at any exam you give, take a look at all of the skills included, and determine which skills were missed the most often and which skills were missed the least often. And it's funny, I specifically chose this diagram because it looks like a cycle that never ends. And for me, it was a cycle that never ended. Remember, I taught the majority of my career at the high school level, but I will tell you, I was teaching 10th and 11th graders Algebra 1. So these were very, very low kids. And these were kids that absolutely would cram for a test, take the test, and then say, oh, okay, good, I can move on. I don't have to look at it again. And when I started using exams in Get More Math, they were like, well, wait a second. Not only do I have to take an exam, I then have to look at the mistakes, fix the mistakes, study the mistakes, take another quiz on those mistakes. And then do you know what I did? When I did that item analysis, and I would look at all the material on, let's say, my Unit 3 test, I could easily pick out the 5 or 6 skills that were missed the most often. And guess what I did with those skills? Because all of my tests were cumulative. When I was building Unit 4, I was sure to pull those 6 skills in so that my students saw them again. And it didn't take them long to realize, wait a second, these skills don't just disappear. I don't get to see them for one chapter and then they're gone. It was a constant cycle. So my exams, my tests, whatever you want to call them, I wasn't just giving them because it was time. I wasn't giving them because I needed to put a grade in a grade book. I was giving them because it was giving me all of this really rich data to inform what I did next. It had this like newfound purpose to exams. So I can tell you that for me, the exams piece and the mixed review piece were fundamental game changers in my classroom. So let's take a little sneak peek into each of these little circles. For our exams, here's a little look at our teacher app. And I will tell you, you will already have created these brief little practice sessions. Oh, you taught slope today? Fine, pull some slope skills in. Well, if you've already built it, it's so simple. You'll take the lessons you've already built and you can pull the skills into your test. Really, really easy. Let's take a look at what that grading looks like. Here's an example. This is Timmy. Timmy's taken a test. You can see that he's got 15 out of 20. But if you notice down here, I can see the question and I have the option to give him full credit, partial credit, or no credit. So that's where, again, you have that control over your student's grade. Let's take a look at what those corrections look like. Now, Timmy logs in to Get More Math after he's taken a test. You'll notice from the top center of his screen, he is in mixed review. Well, as a teacher, if my students are in mixed review, that's my time where I say, okay, we're going to look back at all the things we've done this year and what it is I think you need to practice most. Well, guess what I want Timmy to practice most? I want Timmy to correct his mistakes from his test. And this is what his screen looks like when I simply turn on corrections mode. Remember, he missed 5 questions on that test, and you now see 5 skills above the dotted line. You'll also notice down here on the bottom that there is a problem with an answer that is wrong. This is actually his test question, and that is actually the answer that he put in. So what Get More Math is going to do, it's going to ask 2 things. It's going to say, first of all, I need you to correct this mistake. Once we correct the mistake, we're going to give him a fresh new problem, and we're going to say, okay, now I want you to earn a point, meaning get it right on the first try. So hopefully we corrected your error. Now show me that you can do it on your own. And once the student does that for all 5 errors, then Get More Math will put the dollar signs both above and below the dotted line so that the student can continue to practice in that cumulative review, but also has a very clear picture of what they missed on their test. Because remember, in a few days, I'm going to ask my students to take that follow-up exam. What does that look like? Super simple. From the student screen, they head to the menu in the top right-hand corner. They're going to choose Request Test, and there will be something waiting for them called a follow-up. They'll click that follow-up, and here you can see that Timmy has a 5-question test built just for him based on just the skills that he missed on his quiz, and that's happening in an individualized way throughout my classroom. Now, I loved this data. It was finally data that spoke to me. Let's take a look at the analysis. Here's the picture of a class I have. They took this exam, and you'll notice in the center box, I've got my exam score. We'll give that to you as a raw ratio as well as a percentage. And then on the far right, you'll see the follow-up score. Now, I would compare nearly all of my students, but let's just take a look at Timmy. So Timmy got a 15 out of 20 on his test. But what I loved was look at the follow-up score. The 5 skills he missed, after we took the time to correct them and remediate them, he got 3.5 out of 5 on his follow-up test. And for me, that was encouraging. That was telling me that we were growing. We were moving in the right direction. So I loved this data. You'll notice up top, there is a view analysis link. That will take me to the item analysis for this test, where I would see a list of all the skills and which ones were missed the most often. Okay, so that's just a general overview of our exams module within mixed review and how it changed so much for me and my students in my classroom. Okay, so we're almost done here, folks. I just want everyone to know that I know that Stephanie talked about the free trial on our website. In case you are interested, hopefully not just for the Amazon gift card, but because this is a powerful tool that really could make a huge difference in your classroom. I do want to point out that we right now cover grades 4 all the way up through geometry. So that includes pre-algebra, algebra 1, geometry. We do have a fair amount of algebra 2, as well as grade 3. We just do not have them completed, so we don't like to actually specifically advertise for those grades. But if you are a grade 3 or algebra 2 teacher, I would encourage you to go ahead and sign up for the free trial and still take a look. You'll simply click on that free trial button at the top right-hand corner. We'll ask you to fill out some information, and then we will send you your account. Now, the beautiful piece of Get More Math is it is a powerful, robust tool. And so we offer lots of training options so that our teachers aren't missing the magic and missing all of the different things they can do in their classroom. Let's talk about the 3 different options that we do provide. We provide live group trainings every day, Monday through Friday, throughout the day. There are 3 levels. There's a basic, an intermediate, and advanced. We also have recorded webinars. We know webinars are all the rage right now with everybody stuck at home. We've had some fantastic webinars over the last few months, and so I'll show you where you can find those. And then our last option is an on-demand, self-paced platform. If you're someone that doesn't really want to, you don't want to join a session, you want something you can work through on your own, we do have something called a Get More Math Academy that might meet your needs there. From our website, you'll notice you see the free trial button there. If you head over to the resources menu, if you're interested in those live group trainings, you'll want to click on the link that says free training, and it will send you right to another page where you can choose the level and you can choose the date and time that fits best for you. If you're interested in those recorded webinars, you'll want to head to the section that says recent webinars, and you'll get to see all the things that we've done over the last few weeks. And then down here, the GMM Academy. This is also housed right within the app, but this is another way to get to it. We've got over 15 different courses there, depending on where you're at with your ability level within the app to check those out. So I just wanted to make sure that anybody that was looking for some more information, we've got lots of avenues for you to explore. And that, folks, besides the one last thing that I do want to mention is something about the free trial. I want everyone to be clear that that free trial starts now. It will extend through the summer and then the entire school year for next year. That was just one last piece I wanted to say. And now we really are done, and I'm happy to take questions.